All right. Hello, everyone. I am going to get started. I am recording this so you guys can watch it later if you cannot stay the whole time. All right. So today, one of my favorite topics, we're going to be talking all about our gut, common symptoms runners go through, and how we can fuel to reduce those symptoms. So at Chosky, we love starting with this slide. Our mission is to empower athletes and foster community. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about brief overview of our GI system, most common GI symptoms, fueling considerations, how we can train the gut like we train our muscles when we move and run, this idea of our brain gut connection and how they are related. And then some clinical GI diagnoses, wrap up just one side going through certain diagnoses. So if you are having chronic GI problems, it might be important to seek out medical professional help. Then we'll wrap up with a Q&A. So a little bit about me. I am from Massachusetts. I am a registered dietitian with a master's in strength and conditioning. I teach at UMass Amherst, and I'm a lover of all these things. I love traveling, reading, mountains, coffee, craft beer, cows, and authentic food. These are my top 3 choices. So my nutrition principles, just so you know where I am coming from. So I am evidence-based. I'm open-minded, but I question everything. So I am I do meet athletes in the middle where they are. But if you want to try something, I always ask for a research paper or evidence to support that. There are no such thing as good or bad food. So really enjoy everything. Think of this 80-20, 80% should be our quality foods, but 20% should be our fun foods and those favorite foods and the foods we enjoy. I'm very habit-based versus diet-based. So thinking of your meals, I will help you build your meals versus just giving you a meal plan. All about intuitive fueling. So listening to your hunger, listening to those cravings, and fuel those cravings. If you are craving something, that is a sign your body needs it. So fuel with that. Pay attention to how foods make you feel. If food, especially when it comes to your gut health, if foods are giving you symptoms, might be time to try something else and not just think you have to do it because your friend's doing it or someone on social media is doing it. And avoid the comparison trap there. So try not to compare yourself with others who are doing the same training as you or doing the same race as you, or don't even compare yourself to your past self. Think of where you are now. So this whole presentation is pretty much based on this book here, The Athlete's Gut by Patrick Wilson. So if this is a topic of interest to you, you are chronically going through GI symptoms when you are moving and running, I highly recommend this read. He is also on some podcasts that you can find as well. So a little bit of overview of the anatomy of our GI system. So it starts in the mouth, then it goes down to our pharynx where we swallow, our esophagus, then it enters our stomach, enters the small intestine to the large intestine, and then out through the anus. We do have a few accessory glands, so salivary glands, our saliva in our mouth, liver, pancreas, and then our gallbladder will all release certain hormones and something called bile to help with digestion. So it's about 30 feet in length. So thinking of your 5-foot frame, 6-foot frame, our digestive system is very, very long. And the 2 main functions are to digest food, so break it down in small enough components so we can absorb it and bring it to our cells. It usually takes about 24 to 72 hours for something to enter your mouth to then go out your anus through your stool. We have a cephalic phase, which is even before we even put food in our mouth, the sight and smell of food will start warming up our GI system. We might increase saliva in our mouth. because we know food is coming. So our mouth, we have just basic mechanical breakdown through chewing, and then we do chemically digest carbohydrates and fats. That trick of if you put a saltine in your mouth and just let it sit there, you'll notice that it gets a little bit sweet, and that's the start of that chemical digestion of carbohydrates or starch. Then it moves through esophagus, through muscle contractions, and then through openings to then get to your stomach. So your stomach holds about 16 cups of food and fluid. Mechanical breakdown still occurs. So our stomach is made of a lot of muscles. So it also contracts and relaxes with food present. Chemical breakdown of protein will begin here. We have hydrochloric acid, which helps with digestion. And then we have mucus, which protects our stomach lining from the acidic environment of the stomach. And so we don't get something called a stomach ulcer. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. And some factors that affect stomach emptying or the rate at which food or the bolus at this point leaves our stomach is the volume. So more food will take longer to leave the stomach. Consistency, solid food will take longer to leave the stomach than liquids or soft foods. And then composition. So carbohydrates go through quicker, proteins are next, and then fat takes the longest to go through the stomach. Then we have the small intestine. So this is the main site of digestion and absorption. It's small because it's thin, but it is 20 feet long. So it is the majority, it does make up the majority of our digestive system. So we digest protein, carbohydrates, fat, water, and electrolytes, vitamins, and minerals here in the small intestine. So the pancreas, liver, and gallbladder are known as these accessory organs. So they secrete digestive enzymes. Pancreas also secretes sodium bicarbonate, which neutralizes stomach acid, so we don't burn our small intestine through the hydrochloric acid coming from our stomach. And then we have bile, which is produced in the liver, stored in the gallbladder, and this aids in fat and cholesterol digestion and absorption in our small intestine. So then we have the large intestine. So minerals too, not absorbed in the small intestine will end in the large intestine. It's large because it's very thick, but it is only 5 feet long compared to that small intestine. So functions, it houses intestinal microflora or the microbiota. It's the last step in fluid and electrolyte absorption. And this is ultimately where we form and eliminate our stool or our feces. So going back to that bacterial flora, why is it so important? So we have multiple trillions, depending on what you read, it's 100 trillion microorganisms in our GI system, specifically in our large intestine. So this is a mixture of beneficial and pathogenic. So the functions of our flora, microbiota, is to balance pathogenic microflora, to help with immune function. We do synthesize certain vitamins and short chain fatty acids in our small intestine. In our large intestine, and short chain fatty acids can be fuel for our bacteria. It ferments fibers and starches not digested in the small intestine, which is our gas and flatulence. So having gas is very normal and natural. That means we have happy bacteria. It is a byproduct of bacteria metabolism, and so it is a good thing. Disruption of this microbiota, so maybe having more pathogenic than beneficial, and not having that beneficial bacteria, can cause GI symptoms, of course, which we'll talk about: illness, higher risk of colon cancer, and altered motility and transit time. So transit time and motility meaning the movement of our meal through our GI system. So we have certain things to think about when it comes to boosting this microflora, bacterial flora in our gut. So we have things called probiotics. So this is live bacteria that live in the colon, and we can consume these things via fermented products like yogurt, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, tempeh, miso, kombucha. So these are consuming this live bacteria to help with that balance. Then we need to feed those bacteria. So these are things called prebiotics. So anything really with fiber will feed our bacteria. So fruits, vegetables, whole grains, human breast milk helps with the newborn and infants, microflora in their gut, cocoa powder, seeds will all feed that beneficial bacteria. And with a variety of these prebiotics and probiotics, we get a variety of bacteria, which is so important for overall wellness and health. So then we produce stool or feces. So about 12 to 24 hours to travel through large intestine. So our meal does spend the most amount of time in our large intestine. What is not absorbed in the large intestine passes into the rectum, which is the last bit of our large intestine, or colon. I should have said large intestine and colon can be used interchangeably. So feces are a mixture of undigestible absorbed matter, dead cells, secretions from GI tract, water, and bacteria. A healthy stool in healthy adults is about 75% water and then that 25% solid. So looking at a Bristol stool chart, what we want to see is more that 3 to 4 range. Type 1, type 2 are constipation, not really going regularly. And then type 5, 6, and 7 are more liquidy. Liquidy or mushy, so not having that smooth or sausage-like stool. So think of this as every day and around your workouts or during workouts if you do have to go to the bathroom. So common GI symptoms. So really GI symptoms are inevitable. If you have not experienced GI symptoms when moving or running, you are very lucky. So the goal is really to decrease the severity of these symptoms and reduce the risk in general. So they may still happen, but how can we, what can we think about to reduce the severity and risk of these? So on the right, I just have a visual of what I'm going to talk about right now. So factors that influence these symptoms are form of movement. So jostling movement, like running, will increase your risk of symptoms versus cycling. You're sitting, not really jostling around. Movement intensity and duration. So the higher intensity, so you're doing 400-meter repeats or 200-meter repeats, you are at higher risk of getting GI symptoms. And duration, the longer you go, the higher the risk. A younger age is at a higher risk, less training experience, which usually comes with younger age. Females, we have higher rates of GI symptoms. History of gut symptoms, GI symptoms, general underfueling, so not even around workouts, but just day-to-day underfueling. Improper fueling before and during movement, so thinking of the composition, what is that meal made of? Carbohydrates, protein, or fat? The timing, so are you eating 30 minutes before or 3 hours before? And the volume, the amount of food we are eating. Sleep plays a role. And with sleep, managing stress and anxiety also play a role. Stress and anxiety will be at the end of all the symptoms that I then go through. So first, I want to talk a little bit about hypertonic fluids before we go into it. So this is a crucial consideration during movement as it slows gastric emptying due to the water going from your blood into your GI system. So this is where you will probably get diarrhea or a very uncomfortable feeling in your gut. So this is fluids over 6% carbohydrates. So we see a lot of this in like juices, soft drinks, pickle juice with the sodium. So it's very, very important to consume water with these things and to think of getting fluids that are less than 6%, which are the majority of our sports beverages, Pedialyte, things that are commercially made for sports and movement. You can calculate the the amount of carbohydrate in a beverage with this equation here. So you divide grams of carbohydrates per serving by the volume of one serving in a milliliter. So it's about 30 milliliters in 1 ounce. So 20-ounce bottle equals 600 milliliters. And so you can do that there. So this is where you might get that water belly, and a lot of times it is diarrhea. So nausea and vomiting. So about 10% of athletes experience nausea and vomiting during long endurance runs or high intensity workouts. It does increase through ultra endurance events. So there was a study done in 2011 by Hoffman that looked at 500 athletes in Western states and the Vermont 100, and 4 out of 10 runners had nausea and vomiting that impacted their performance. And there were 23% of the DNFs were due to nausea and vomiting. So possible causes are this surge in our stress response. Epinephrine and norepinephrine, also called catecholamines, will induce nausea. Dehydration, reduced gut blood flow. So not blood wants to go to our muscles when we move and doesn't want to go to our gut. So that could increase the risk of nausea and vomiting. Fatty foods before or during high intensity movement. So during ultra events, fatty foods will give you a lot more energy than carbohydrates. So is an important component. But if you start sprinting, fatty foods will not be your best friend. Fatty foods and fried foods. Hypertonic fluids, which I just mentioned. Large volumes of food too soon before movement. So within an hour, 90 minutes. Hyponatremia, so low blood sodium. So overdoing it on the water and not thinking about the sodium and the electrolytes. Hypoglycemia, so low blood sugar, so not getting that fuel of carbohydrates if you are moving more than 90 minutes. And then high doses of caffeine or NSAIDs, so ibuprofen being an example. And then stress and anxiety before exercise, during exercise can play a role. So then we have reflux, GERD, heartburn. So GERD is gastroesophageal reflux disease. I have an image here looking at what that looks like in our stomach. So this is our stomach here. This is our esophagus. So if someone has reflux, you can see it is a very irritated sphincter or opening. And so food will actually go back up into your esophagus. And this is when you can get heartburn. This is more common during running and strength training. There's a lot of research done on that. Possible causes are that reduced gut blood flow, that high intensity movement like strength training, fueling within 1 hour of movement when you have a history of reflux. So if you do have a history of this, try fueling maybe 90 minutes or 2 hours before. Fatty foods and fried foods, hypertonic fluids again, large volumes. And then there are certain things to think about to reduce this day to day, but also through movement. So chocolate, citrus foods like oranges, such as fruits, spicy foods, carbonated beverages, coffee, and alcohol. And then stress and anxiety can play a role. So fullness and bloating, some possible causes of this: dehydration, reduced gut blood flow, fatty foods, solid proteins, fiber-rich foods, so whole wheat bread versus white bread, whole grain, brown rice versus white rice, ton of fruits and vegetables right before. Hypertonic fluids again, large volumes of food or fluid. Just a general high fiber diet may increase your risk of fullness and bloating, and then stress and anxiety play a role. So cramps and side stitches. So if you have not had a cramp or side stitch before, you are very lucky. About 10 to 20% of runners report having side stitches, and 72% report lowering intensity of their movement due to a side stitch and a cramp. So cramps, probably due to reduced gut blood flow. That was hypertonic fluids, so choosing too many carbohydrate malabsorption. So not absorbing the carbohydrates that you are consuming, whether that, and I'll dive into a little bit more, but thinking of the composition of your fuel that you're consuming. NSAIDs, again, stress and anxiety. So side stitches, pretty much similar idea, possible causes as cramps, but just jostling or twisting of core. And then there are some other things like incorrect breathing, posture, spinal alignment that can play a role when it comes to getting side stitches. So then we have gas, diarrhea, and poo or poop. So gas is the most common symptom of movement and running in general. It is the breakdown of fiber from our intestinal bacteria. So remember, it's our happy bacteria, our bacteria's fuel. Could be due to carbohydrate malabsorption, which I'll dive into, and then just a general high fiber intake around movement, but just day to day. Diarrhea and poo could be due to just general anxiety around movement, reduced gut blood flow, those hypertonic fluids again, jostling, carbohydrate malabsorption. There is something called traveler's diarrhea. So if you are traveling and you eat something, so whether you get a foodborne illness or just water, poor water can play a role. Certain medications, so antibiotics can play a role, metformin, which is a diabetes medication. And then certain supplements like caffeine and sodium bicarbonate can increase the risk of diarrhea and going to the bathroom. So constipation is the other side of it. So 1 in 6 Americans do suffer from chronic constipation. We in America consume not much fiber compared to other countries. It's not too common during movement, but general possible causes could be inadequate fluid intake during the day, a low carbohydrate and low fiber diet. So we find with people on the keto diet or a very low carbohydrate diet, they're removing fruits, vegetables, and whole grains from their nutrition and their fueling. So they may be low in fiber and may have constipation. Underfueling in general, so not consuming enough energy for your needs. Holding it in, so just reducing the urge to go to the bathroom and holding it in. It's like, just go if you need to go. Medications, so opioids, so pain medications, antacids, certain blood pressure medications, certain antidepressants can increase your risk of constipation. And then overall general stress and anxiety. So then we have bloody stool. So there's some research that was in the athlete's gut. 13 to 23% of marathons test positive for bloody stool, with 1 to 2% with visible loss. So a lot of times you don't know that you have bloody stool or bloody poop. 85% of 100-mile runners had a positive post-race test versus 8% of bike racers. So we can kind of think it is due to the jostling of running. Most situations are benign, but chronically losing blood in your stool can lead to iron deficiency anemia due to the loss of blood. Some possible causes are that reduced gut blood flow, dehydration through movement, jostling, bruising of your GI system, and then chronic use of NSAIDs is a very common side effect. So nutrient and fueling considerations. So reviewing those symptoms, thinking of yourself, do you have any of those? So how can we apply nutrition and fueling to reduce these risks? So overall energy. So athletes may need upwards of 10,000 calories in a day. If you're running 100 miles, you need a lot of energy. So making sure we are meeting that energy. So needs based on body size, so height, weight, lean body mass, sex, age, composition of diet, and then movement. So involuntary movement. So we have something called non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So you're a fidgeter, you talk with your hands a lot. You tap your feet. Those are movements that you have to keep in mind when it comes to calculating your energy. And then of course, planned exercise. So you're going for a run. So consequences of under consuming energy, we see bloating, premature fullness. So getting full very easily, not being hungry, nausea, stomach pain, constipation, gut discomfort. So high fiber intake, low energy dense food. So consuming almost too much fiber, so you're not hungry to fuel and get enough energy or calories in a day. Be careful with food tracking apps and watches. Usually they underestimate physical activity energy needs, and you need more than your watch or those apps say. So then we have carbohydrates. So this is when it comes to like hypertonic fluids, kind of confusing. So I tried to lay it down here. So when it comes to carbohydrates, this is your primary energy source, but it is limited. Fat, we store a lot of fat. Carbohydrates, not so much. So we want to make sure we are consuming multiple sources of carbohydrates. So glucose and fructose. If we consume both of those things, they use different transport mechanisms in our body. So they are more readily absorbed when they are consumed together, and you won't have this GI upset as if you were just to have fructose. So glucose and fructose, so table sugar is pretty much that source. We find that in candy, cereals, sweetened beverages. We find a lot of fructose down here in high fructose corn syrup, honey, agave. These are some high fructose fruits. So apples, apricots, dates, pears, watermelon, agave. So having a lot of those can lead to some GI upset. So thinking of your fueling plan before and during, are you incorporating some of these things? This may be leading to some GI symptoms. Going back up, so we have maltodextrin. If you have a gel near you or consume gels, this is the number one ingredient. So it is very readily absorbed and allows our bodies to tolerate more carbohydrate concentrations than consuming just fructose or glucose. Lactose intolerance can play a role. So limiting cow's milk, yogurt, soft cheeses, sour cream, ice cream during and before runs for some people. If you are lactose intolerant, sharp cheddar cheese, which I love cheese during long runs for people because of the high fat content. It does not have lactose usually. So that is something that you may be able to tolerate. Sugar alcohols. So these are commonly found in like sugar-free candy, gum. So if you're a chronic gum chewer during movement and having some GI issues, sugar alcohols could be the culprit there. So paying attention to that. Also, we find sugar alcohols sometimes in protein powders. So if you're having protein before or during, thinking of that also. There is this idea of carbohydrate rinsing. So if you are moving for an hour, 90 minutes, you may be able to just swish with carbohydrates versus consuming carbohydrates in shorter running events, and your central nervous system feels like it is getting carbohydrates. So we could have an energy boost there without actually consuming carbohydrates. But this is for shorter, not going over 90 minutes. Or going over 90 minutes, you will need to consume energy from actual carbohydrate foods. Greater than 10 grams of fiber before and during movement. So this, it is okay to have white bread, white rice, white pasta. Oatmeal is like the number one go-to for a lot of runners, but is very high fiber. So if you are having GI symptoms, oatmeal might not be the best option for you. Dried fruits, certain cereals are very high in fiber. Certain protein bars are very high in fiber. So looking at that component, beans and lentils. And then the hydrogels. So hydrogels are up and coming. So this is like the Morton hydrogels. The idea there is you are able to consume more carbohydrate with less GI distress. Very preliminary research. We don't know too much on it, but very promising when it comes to those who may have sensitive stomachs and not able to tolerate a lot of carbohydrate. This will allow you to do that. So then we have protein and fat. So protein, we do not want to use protein for energy. So we aren't consuming protein for that energy component. But in ultra events, it is important to consume protein, about 20 to 30 grams every 3 hours, just to help kickstart that muscle repair. So if you are running 6+ hours, your body is breaking down. So it is important to incorporate 40 to 50 grams within 90 minutes pre-movement may increase fullness, bloating, nausea, flatulence, and diarrhea. 40 to 50 grams is quite a bit. So either move that meal out closer to 3 hours or limit to your protein intake right before. Fat, fuel at rest and low intensity movement. So it does provide double the amount of energy as carbohydrates and protein with limiting the bulk. So you don't have to eat a lot of volume of it. So these are like our oils, nut butters, cheese, bacon, things like that, eggs. More storage than carbohydrates. We have endless amounts of fat in our body, but high fat meals and high fried food meals do slow digestion, so may cause GI upset. And then chronic high fat diets, such as the keto diet, does boost ability to burn fat during exercise, but may interfere with ability to burn carbohydrates. So biggest lesson or thing to think about, if you are on a high fat, low carb, and then you want to consume carbohydrates during your event, make sure you're practicing with carbohydrates and not just doing that on the day of when the majority of your diet is fat, because your body will not be trained to do that. High fat diets may hinder high intensity performance, alter gut microbiome because we don't have that fiber or those prebiotics feeding our gut bacteria. So there isn't enough long-term evidence looking at the keto diet and performance. Medium chain triglycerides, so MCT oil, we see coconut oil, palm kernel oil used to be like, a supplement. There's no substantial evidence that it helps performance. If anything, it may increase risk of nausea, cramping, and diarrhea in large doses. So enjoy coconut oil, MCT oil, and palm kernel oil if you enjoy them, but don't think that it's a performance enhancer per se. So then fluid and sodium. So a loss of 2% body weight may impair exercise performance. For movement about 2 hours, you can drink based off thirst. So drinking when you're thirsty. If you are a heavy sweater in longer events, I have a coworker who lost 8 pounds in a 20 miler during the summer. That is a lot of weight to lose and a lot of fluid to lose. And when you calculate how much water he'd have to drink, that is about 16 cups or 4 liters of water in a 20-mile run, and he's quick. That is a lot of fluid to intake, and that can lead to some GI discomfort. So our goal, if you are a heavy sweater, to just replace 25 to 50% of your sweat loss if sweating over 34 ounces per hour, or you lose 2 pounds every hour. I talk a little bit more about this in the general nutrition, performance nutrition class that you can watch from the athlete portal. So drink every 10 to 15 minutes to keep up with your hydration. If you are in a longer event, just take sips, because if we are chugging water, it can lead to some GI discomfort. Inconclusive that temperature of fluids make a difference. You read some things that it's like cold water is better, but room temperature water is better. There really isn't like a definitive answer to that question yet. Sodium, so large sodium quantities of sodium at one time may induce nausea. So if you are popping 4 capsules every hour of salt tabs, maybe take one every 15 minutes, and that can reduce nausea. If you are a heavy sweater or just a sweater in general in long events, about 500 to 1,000 milligrams of sodium per hour can do the trick. So muscle cramps, think of pickle juice, ginger, mustard, vinegar, hot shot, can help with muscle cramps. Not necessarily GI related, but those are some things that can help with cramping instead of just sodium and popping those salt tabs, which could induce nausea. So training the gut. This is something I work with all my athletes who are doing endurance events and need to fuel during an event. Even before event, our gut can be trained. So simply just watch the competitive eaters of the world. The world record is 75 hot dogs with buns in 10 minutes. That is a lot of hot dogs in 10 minutes, and they train for that. So you can train your gut. Fuel similarly during the day for how you will fuel during a race, especially an ultra race. So when you are fueling just with meals during the day that you want to try in a training run or an ultra endurance run, your body will not be surprised when it takes it during an ultra run. Research what is going to be at these races. Are they quesadillas? Are they bacon? Are they egg sandwiches, turkey sandwiches, peanut butter sandwiches, and fuel with that weeks leading up to your event so your stomach is not surprised. Your small intestine increases absorption of X, and the X meaning if you are fueling a lot with carbohydrates day to day, if you are a high carb, low fat, or high fat, low carb, or moderate each, your body will know and adjust to the absorption of that in our stomach and small intestine. Consume sports drinks, carbohydrate-based fuel during the days, weeks leading up to event. So your body is used to them and not surprised when all of a sudden you are drinking liters and liters of sports drink during your event of a few hours or 36 hours or a few days long. So if you are consuming carbohydrates, you will increase those transporters. If you are more high fat, you will increase those transporters. So again, what you are fueling with day to day is so important to think about when you are fueling through a workout. Repeatedly expose your stomach to large volumes of fluid and food before and during training. So practice this, eat dinner and then go for a run. That will teach your body to be able to adjust to large volumes of food and fluid during a run. Because that's what you have to do in an ultra event. It's a eating competition with running thrown in. So now diving into the cephalic brain and enteric brain connection. So this idea of I have a gut feeling. So they were thinking this is our first brain. Now they're thinking, maybe our gut is our first brain because of the amount of neurotransmitters we produce in our gut. So I have a short video here, which I'm going to show.
Where we sit right now in history is right at the cusp of a complete paradigm shift in how we think about mental wellness. If we had a problem that we perceived here, it seemed like it made sense that it was in the brain and we should target the brain. And that's what we've been doing for the last 100, 200 years. What we're realizing now is that maybe that isn't our primary target. And what we're seeing here in the brain is a secondary effect of something else that's happening in the body. And what we've just learned in the last 5 to 10 years is that, yes, that is a secondary effect. The primary effect, and therefore the primary target, is in the gut. That's the second brain. That's where we have 100 trillion bacteria in our intestines. That number is more than there are stars in the galaxy, in the Milky Way. So the gut microbiome makes more serotonin than the brain does. That's the feel-good neurotransmitter. It makes more dopamine than the brain. In order for these neurotransmitters in the gut to have their effect in the brain, they have to be able to communicate with each other. And they do that through chemicals that the gut makes, chemicals that the bacteria make, that travel throughout the body, that signal through the nervous system, that signal through the immune system. This idea of the gut-brain axis, targeting the brain, but targeting the second brain in the gut, and then targeting the communication network between them, that axis. That's really the forefront of medicine these days, and the forefront of science, and the forefront of how we're going to actually get ahead of all of these mental wellness issues and have a benefit in people's lives.
All right, so yeah, that video pretty much sums up this diagram here, but this is gut-brain axis, so that our gut and our brain are in constant communication with each other. So acute stress, psychological stress, anxiety, you may lose your appetite, you may overeat or crave foods, you might have nausea, vomiting. If you're nervous, you might have butterflies. When we consume fuel, we send brain signals to release digestive enzymes. We produce hormones and neurotransmitters, and 95% of our body's happy hormone is made in the gut. So why is psychological stress and anxiety related to sports performance and GI symptoms? So again, these catecholamines are increased, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol when we have psychological stress and anxiety, similar to physiological stress in movement. So pulls blood away from the gut. We do have motility or transit time changes in our GI system. So we might have gut leakiness. Caffeine and stimulants, alcohol will increase our GI symptoms and psychological stress and anxiety. We want to avoid dehydration and hypoglycemia. So making sure we are keeping up with our hydration and our carbohydrate intake. Hypoglycemia meaning low blood sugar. Practice certain pre-event rituals, music. This is probably the most used pre-event thing out there, listening to your favorite music, whether it's relaxing or upbeat. Deep breathing, meditation, progressive muscle relaxation, positive self-talk, imagery, and visualization. If you do chronically become very nervous and stressed before events, seek out a sports psychologist or mental health provider. You could go through cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, hypnosis, acupuncture. Certain pharmaceuticals have shown to help reduce the risk of stress and anxiety around events in just general. Some certain GI disorders, I'm not going to dive into this. This is outside the scope of the presentation, but if you chronically have GI symptoms that are not really related to movement, seek out a medical professional and get tested. So for certain intolerances, gluten and lactose being high up there, food allergies too can present themselves as GI symptoms. Celiac disease, which is a autoimmune disease where you cannot absorb gluten. Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, inflammatory bowel disease, all affecting the GI symptom. Irritable bowel syndrome, functional dyspepsia, which is just get full very easily. It's an unknown cause, just fullness. Stomach ulcers, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, diverticulosis. The ones with asterisks, so these have promising research on the connection between anxiety, stress, and depression with the symptoms. So going through stress relievers, meditation, prayer, seeking out medical or a sports psychologist can help reduce the symptoms of those certain diseases. So these are my references. Again, if you really enjoy this topic, I strongly recommend The Athlete's Gut. This is primarily where I got this topic from and why I wanted to present it to you all. There are a couple research articles I cited. And then next class will be December 8th, and we'll talk all about fad diets and what to think about when we see these diets out there. Intermittent fasting, keto, paleo, juicing. What do those all mean, and which ones are fads and which ones may help boost performance and health? So I'm gonna stop the recording, open it up to questions, and kind of talk with you guys on what fad diets you want to learn more about.